Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is part 2 of a City Talk conversation on public transportation in the New York region. It was born in crisis 40 years ago. It's in one now. It's the largest urban mass transit system in the hemisphere. It moves 8.5 million people a week with over 2,000 miles of rail and subway track, 4,000 miles of bus routes, nearly 70,000 employees, and an operating budget of nearly $11 billion. It is also deeply in debt. To continue our discussion of the problems and prospects confronting public transportation in the New York region is Richard Ravitch. Mr. Ravitch, at the behest of Governor David Paterson, chaired a commission on the MTA and its financing. The report was released on December 4th to both cheers and boos. Mr. Ravitch has a distinguished history of public service. He rescued the Urban Development Corporation in the 1970s, is widely credited with saving the MTA, where he served as chairman from 1979 to 1983. He also chaired the 1988-89 Charter Revision Commission. He has also served as Major League Baseball's chief negotiator, and in recent years, he is a partner in the law firm of Ravitch and Rice. In 2008, he was elected a Democratic delegate for Barack Obama. Welcome back, Mr. Ravitch.
Glad to be here again.
So we talked in the last show about essentially the nature of the system, the needs of the system, and at least some of the recommendations that your commission put forth, particularly the fair policy and new approaches to funding sources. What I'd like to do today is continue looking at these recommendations, as well as looking at some of the things that the commission did not formally consider. On page 4 of your report, it states the MTA's deficit is rooted in structural budget imbalance driven by years of over-reliance on self-supported debt to fund its capital needs. Now, so the problem is debt, a huge amount of debt. 20% of the operating budget is debt service. Now, you're raising money through tolls, the mobility tax, and increased fares, but isn't that money simply going to be used to get more debt?
Well, that's a good question, and I appreciate the opportunity to explain it. When I introduced the idea of borrowing, it was because MTA had no other access to any other capital whatsoever. And I said in 1981 and 1982, and ever since then, that you need a revenue source to support the capital that's necessary. And absent any other revenue source, you must use the fare box.
Okay.
The legislature questioned me vigorously in 81 and 82.
I remember.
And said, if we approve your borrowing scheme, won't the fare go up? And I said, yes, it absolutely will if you don't enact new tax revenues to support the debt service on those additional borrowings. The fare will go up. But frankly, in 1981, you have only two choices. Either the fare goes up or the system ceases to function at all. And the legislature understood that that was their real choice. Now, what's happened is from 2000 to 2004, the MTA continued to borrow using its operating budget as the sole source of support for the interest payments on that debt, without any additional revenues. So this commission is now proposing something very fundamentally different. We are saying that after year 1 of this mobility tax,
which is that 1/3 of 1% on employer payroll.
Exactly. That money, which we currently estimate to be $1.5 billion a year, would go into a lockbox and would be used after year 1 exclusively to finance the next capital plan. And therefore, in the future, there would be no impact of the borrowing on the MTA's budget.
So we would be locked into our current debt service, but not adding additional debt service.
Yes.
How much money does the authority tend to borrow and need to borrow to meet its future capital needs?
Well, again, I haven't seen their next capital plan, but based on the draft of the plan that they put together when they thought congestion pricing was going to pass, it was in the area of about $30 billion.
Okay, now let's break up that $30 billion. The first portion of this, tier one, if you will, is the maintenance and enhancement and modernization of the current system. This is a sine qua non. This has got to happen, right?
Right.
Now, how much approximately does this cost? And all of this becomes bonded, right?
Yes, or to the extent that that $1.5 billion of mobility tax revenue, which, by the way, is inflation sensitive, it will continue to grow.
Right.
As I said in the first program, New York's not about to die. We're going to get out of this fiscal tragedy we're in the midst of it. I'm not sure. I'm not smart enough to tell you whether it's going to be this year or next year or the year after, but we're going to be out of it. And to the extent that that $1.5 billion is representative of the economy in the region as a whole, it's going to grow. And clearly, with the government borrowing as much money as they're borrowing these days, you know you're going to see a rate of inflation, which is going to increase those revenues dramatically. So I believe,
as well as no increased cost to the operation.
No question about it. But actually, costs on a lot of the construction would be less today than they would otherwise have been, sadly, because of the
deflation, right?
The deflation that we're going through. There are too many variables to be too accurate in prediction.
Speculate.
But $1.5 billion should be enough, given the creditworthiness of that stream of revenue, to easily support $20 to $25 billion of capital borrowing.
But aren't we then just passing? I mean, it seems again we're passing this off to.
No, sir, we're not.
Go. Explain.
We're passing it off to every generation of employer is going to be paying this minuscule tax, which will support the capital needs of the MTA.
Okay. Some folks have suggested.
Not the fare box, not the rider.
Okay.
Not the employee on the system.
Okay. Some have suggested that with the $1.5 billion, if you get it out of this regional mobility tax, that you could pay off the $1.2 billion shortfall in the current operating budget, as well as providing a couple of $100 million left over. Why then go through the increase in tolls and increase in fares?
Well, we have recommended that most of that money in year one be used to defray the most of the service cuts and most of the fare increase that the MTA is currently calling.
Okay,
which
and
is
then
why we say only after year two, 2010 onward, do this mobility tax proceeds get put in a box and be used only for capital purposes.
If this plan is not, let's say that none of the plan gets adopted. There's no increase in fares. There are no tolls on the East River bridges and Harlem River bridges. There's no change in tolling in general, and you don't get this mobility tax. What happens? Let's say you get not only do you not always get what you want, but you get nothing. What are we looking at, us riders?
You're looking at the beginning of an utter and complete disaster, and you see. The consequence of that would be a shrinking New York,
both in terms of businesses, people, and the million people that we expect don't come.
This region is more dependent on public transit than any region.
So this is an absolute necessity.
I believe it is.
How are you pitching this? I mean, is that the pitch? You got to do it or else? And are they listening? Are they listening? The legislature, the governor, the city council members.
I believe they're listening. I can't say that every one of them agrees with me at the moment, but it's very tough for people to bear, to face up to the consequences. I have to remind people all the time they're responsible for all the consequences of what they do and not just the ones that they intend. And that's the truth. I mean, I remember, and there's nobody in public life. I mean, I was very fortunate to do my public service in the Hugh Carey, Ed Koch, Pat Moynihan era. They never asked me to do anything that I wouldn't be proud to read about on the front page of the New York Times. And they were all politicians and successful at getting elected. And yet they did things on the merits all the time. Even when Ed Koch was lambasting me on television regularly for one thing or another.
I remember.
Nonetheless, when push came to shove and anything significant was needed from the city of New York, he was there providing it. And I tell you all of this because Ed Koch and Hugh Carey, when about the same time that they announced my appointment as chairman of the MTA, they told the public there would be no fare increase for 2 years. At my confirmation hearing, I was asked by the Senate committee that was reviewing my qualifications, are you prepared to raise the fare? And I said, absolutely, if I don't have enough money to run a safe system. So it was that, in essence, is the question. Are the people running the MTA going to do what is fashionable politically at the moment, or are they going to do what's in the best interest of the system itself?
Oh man, as a cynical political scientist, I don't know how I might answer that question, at least in the abstract. Go ahead.
My experience is they always answered it on the merits. Carey and Koch in the legislature were always there.
And you expect and hope that, or you hope that this is the case this time? What indications do you have that this approach, these plans, these recommendations will be adopted in large measure or in their entirety?
I am not making any predictions. I'm expressing aspirations.
Okay.
And saying based on experience. Well, certainly I know that both David Patterson and Mike Bloomberg have always called the shots on the merits, and they will continue to do that. I have no doubt of that.
And you've had conversations, I presume, with them on this plan?
Well, of course, absolutely.
And you had both budget directors on the commission. Did they sign off on this document?
Well, since neither the mayor or governor had seen the document when the commission voted on it, I, as a matter of courtesy, both the city and state budget directors are extraordinarily talented public servants. They both happen to be friends of mine, and I thought it was inappropriate to ask them to cast a vote when the principals that they worked for hadn't even seen the report.
But
the media would have had a lot of fun with it.
That's exactly right, and we don't want them to have any fun at all.
I don't want to feed the animals in the zoo.
Oh, you got to make friends with them.
I do. I've called them that many times. They love me for it.
But I guess the fundamental question is that you fully expect the support of the governor and the mayor and their active involvement and support in pushing this.
I have no doubt of it. But what people have to remember is it is the legislature of the state of New York that has the power and the responsibility to appropriate money and to deal with issues.
This is
like
the same
this.
legislature, though, that killed congestion pricing. You're still optimistic.
I'm still optimistic.
And how are you intending to convince you, meaning yourself personally, but those people who are in favor of these recommendations?
I know this may sound naive, but talking to people, you treat people with respect. I don't criticize the people who disagree with me. I don't say the people who are against tolls are bad people. I try to argue with them. One
of the recommendations that you made were some governance changes in the structure of the MTA itself. Looking at the MTA as an organization, as a bureaucracy, if you had the ability to write anew, you had a blank slate, how would you structure a regional transportation authority? And would it look like the MTA?
It would, and very frankly, the recommendations is something that we feel very strongly about. We said there should be some qualifying experience to be on the board of the MTA.
Other than fundraisers and personal friends, et cetera. Okay.
I have to have some experience that had some relevance. And that's a broad range of things, from construction to finance to business management. You don't have to be an expert on railroads, but you have to know something about one of the many things the MTA
But these
does.
criteria would have to be employed by the governor, because the governor actually nominates and the Senate confirms.
Absolutely correct. And then we said that the chairman should be the chief executive officer.
Yeah, there was
which
a
it was.
law change, and I guess it was 2005, that really split the functions between the executive director and the chairman. What was the impact of that, and what should be the case?
Well, I think that the MTA, because of its size, its $11 billion operating budget, its $30 billion capital budget, puts it in a somewhat unique category. And when the MTA was created, the legislature intended, by giving every member of the board a 6-year term, that it be independent of the political system.
Right.
Now, it can't be separated from the political system, because ultimately the elected officials have and should have the power to make the fundamental financial decisions. So how do you properly blend the need to have a degree of independence, the ability to call the shots on the merits and do what's necessary for the transit system, with the perceptions of the people who run for office, because we do live in a democracy?
Sure.
How do you blend that? And I think by having a chairman being the chief executive officer, rather than somebody who de facto is appointed by the governor and serves in effect at the pleasure of the
Almost
governor.
like a state commissioner.
Exactly. That's a much more effective way. Second of all, I think that when, if the board had acted in a way that I think they should have, this commission wouldn't have been necessary.
What should they have done?
Well,
The ubiquitous they.
it's not a criticism of the
No,
people
go.
there. A lot of them are friends of mine. I have great respect for them.
Former friends, but go ahead.
But I like to think they're still friends, and the chairman is a wonderful guy and an able guy. But they lived under a different mantra. They thought their job was to do what the governor wanted at any given moment in time. And a lot of them have told me we voted the way the governor asked us to vote. That is a perfectly legitimate way, but that's not the way that this commission thought this board ought to function.
Also, another related problem to what you just described is this holdover phenomenon, where people who are named by one governor, they're not replaced, for months, for years.
We suggested that no holdovers serve more than 6 months, because a new governor is entitled to have a board of his or her choosing.
And in terms of the services it provides, the MTA is appropriately structured in terms of its constituent elements, the Metro North, Long Island Railroad.
Well, there is a fair geographical balance. Some would argue with, I think, some real merit that the city is underrepresented on the board, but that could be adjusted also.
And just to clarify, the mayor of the city of New York suggests to the governor 4 of the members, and then you've got the outlying New York counties. I think there are 8 of them outside of New York that name members to the commission itself. Yeah. Who else is on the commission besides people who are named
on the commission or on the board?
On the board, rather.
Just the people who are named by the governor, and which has to include people from the outlying counties, as well as the people that the mayor recommends.
Okay. Another recommendation was to increase the transparency and accountability of the MTA. And those of us who have followed the MTA closely, particularly through the double set of books controversy of about 5 years ago. How opaque is the MTA, and how do you make it more transparent?
Well, first of all, I think the people who run it are honorable, able people, and there's been no effort on anybody's part to fool the public.
Right.
I think that particularly with respect to the capital planning and capital spending, it is very important that things be made more transparent so there is more public understanding. But please, the public has to understand you have a legislative oversight, you have the state controller's oversight, you have, in some respects, federal oversight because there are federal dollars in this, and therefore congressional committees have jurisdiction. I think controllers generally, certainly in my day, controllers always managed to release reports on Sunday that were critical of the MTA because there wasn't enough news, and they generally got in the papers on Monday morning.
Okay.
Maybe that's still the case. I haven't followed it closely, but it certainly was in my day. So there's plenty of oversight. But the MTA has got to be able to do more things to explain to the public with greater clarity why they are choosing to spend the money that they're choosing to spend it on.
Okay. The commission did not look at certain things. It was charged with financing, which I'm sure was enough for you to do over that period of time. One of the things that it did not specifically do is look at the priorities in for example, the capital plan for New York City and the region. The first priority, as you discussed in the first show, was the maintenance and upkeep of the system at a cost of some 20 to 25 billion. Then you've got all of these expansion projects. You've got the Second Avenue subway. You have East Side Access. You have any number of expansions, your regional bus service. What are in your mind, without speaking for the authority, what do you see as the absolutely critical sine qua nons that just have to be done in terms of expansion?
Well, I will tell you, the Second Avenue subway, another main line on the Long Island Railroad, bringing Metro North west of the Hudson, creating some mass transit facility that goes from the Tappan Zee Bridge to the Long Island Sound. I mean, you have to understand, the U.S. Census Bureau, Doug, has projected that the population of the United States will grow in the next 40 years by over 150 million Americans. And most of that growth is going to take place in the major metropolitan areas. And we sit at the center of the biggest of them all. And that expansion and that growth can't take place here unless there is an infrastructure, a transportation infrastructure and an educational infrastructure that can accommodate that growth. And if each generation doesn't commit itself in investing in that growth, in investing for the future, we're going to pay a dreadful price.
Okay. The world is a tough world, and you've got to you've got to prioritize. What is essential in that list? What has to happen? What do we have to do?
You have to do the state of good repair, and in my judgment, you have to keep growing the system. If
How do you
want
grow?
the city and the growth to occur.
Okay, which has to happen first?
Well, the decision was made to do East Side Access. That brings the Long Island Railroad rider to the east side of Manhattan for those who work there, and the Second Avenue subway.
In that order or the reverse
order? Well, they're
order?
done contemporaneously, and they both have federal funding, and the state match is not as consequential in dollars. That it has to be.
And they're both, and in your mind, they're both going to happen, because I remember how many Second Avenue subway starts have we had, even in my lifetime.
It's broken into stages. Certainly, the first stage will get completed, and the second stage, which has federal approval, will probably go ahead.
Okay, talk about first, second, and third stages for the Second Avenue subway. Yeah, I mean,
I believe the first stage is the one they're doing now.
Right.
From 96 down to 62nd. The next one is 62nd down to Grand Central.
Okay, and then
both down, and then the most important is up to the east, through the East Bronx, where there's this extraordinary opportunity to grow, to build housing. There's enough land there to build housing for hundreds of thousands of people.
And I mean, the Bronx began with the extension of the subway. So in a sense, you're using the subway system as a mechanism to force the development and also to spread it out. So the Second Avenue subway, I mean, are we going to get it? Because if the Lex, if we're on the east side and the Lex Avenue line that goes down, we're discriminated against. The west side's got a lot. Go ahead.
I am an optimist. And I have enormous faith in the common sense of the people here. I really do. I mean, you got to remember, I've been around a long time. I was born in '33, as my professor used to say, the year that we got Adolf Hitler, and a war that was scared the hell out of everybody, a depression, and look where we've gotten to. And look who we just elected president of the United States.
Yeah, let's
with
look.
a great vision.
We don't have much time, but you were a delegate to the Barack Obama delegate to the 2008 convention. Talk about that very briefly.
I read his autobiography 2 years ago, read his second book, asked to meet him, met him briefly, was immensely impressed, and decided this would be a great thing for this country if he were elected president.
And you ran as
a little bit.
And you ran as a delegate in Manhattan, and you convention great.
And the convention was an exciting experience. His speech was unbelievable.
Optimistic about the Feds really, sort of reinvesting in urban areas and having a coherent urban policy?
I think that President Obama's made it very clear he's going to have a very large stimulus plan. New York will be the beneficiary of that. I'm sure it will include help on picking up Medicaid costs and on infrastructure. We don't know how much. We don't know yet. After all, there's a month before he becomes president.
So you're optimistic. We can look forward to no disaster, no draconian cuts.
We can look forward to an administration in Washington that has the same fundamental commitment as the administration of the state and city of New York.
Oh, man. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.